Yeah, we are recording our lesson now. Today is 4-1. It's biodiversity. Now, when we talk about biodiversity, it's a word that we use quite often in ecology, but it may not be quite, you may not realize how deep the word goes. It's basically, it's the variety of life on Earth, and that's easy enough because when we think diversity as far as humans go, we think skin color, culture, religion. Those are all different parts of diversity for humans. But for animals and ecosystems, they also, just like we have, I just labeled 3 different types of diversity, right? We have our skin color, we have our culture, we have our religions. All right, there's also there's 4 different types of diversity for the animal kingdom for ecology. All right, so the first type is that I have in my picture here is genetic diversity, and you can see that these are like 3 frogs. We're talking about the genetics within a species, and we'll go into quite a bit of detail with that one today. The second one, this is the one we use most often when we talk about diversity. Usually we automatically think of species diversity. It's the kind of animals that live there or how many of them there are. And then the third one here that I have in the picture is ecosystem diversity. That's all the different types of biomes and ecosystems that are available. Now, those are the 3 that are in the pictures, and those are the 3 we're going to talk about today. There's a 4th one here that's not in this picture. It's called functional diversity, and we'll talk about that more tomorrow. We'll get like a snippet with a film clip we're watching when we have a film clip on genetic diversity, and it'll slightly go into functional diversity for you, but not much. But functional diversity we'll cover tomorrow. All right, so let's start off with the first one, and the most common one is species diversity. And looking at your 2 pictures right here, we have this one is the variety of animals that live in an ecosystem, and this must be a coastal ecosystem because there's a dolphin right here, right next to the rabbits and the deer. So this must be along the coast somewhere. But this is the variety of organisms that live here, and this other side is the abundance. How many of them are there? So there's 2 parts of species diversity: the variety of animals that live there and the abundance of those animals. How many are there? Okay, so those are the 2 parts of species diversity. And as what we know right now on Earth, we know that there are 2 million species plus of organisms that live on Earth right now. 2 million different types of organisms. And we haven't discovered them all. There may be 7 to 10 million on Earth right now. Now, most of them, some people are thinking all the way up to 100 million, but that's like a far-ranging thing. Most of the organisms that we have named are insects and bugs. It says right here that 99% of the animal species are smaller than a bee. All right, so when I say that there are 7 to 10 million more animals to be discovered, more species to be discovered, I'm not talking about you're going to find another type of rhino or another type of elephant. Okay, we've pretty much maxed out on the large animals. But as far as the small ones go, there are many, many, many that are still on Earth to be found. And of all of these 2 million species that are on Earth right now, it's only 10% of what has lived on Earth in the past. Extinction is going to be part of this chapter as well. I think the next section or the one after. So extinction is going to be part of this chapter. So of all of those 2 million known species, that's only 10% of all that we have had on the Earth in past, and that's just what we know from the fossil record. There could possibly even be more. So there's lots and lots of different types of species on Earth, and that again is species diversity. All right, moving down here to genetic diversity. You recognize Darwin's finches? Okay, most of you guys remember this from biology class. We learned about genetics and heredity in biology class. So when we're talking about genetic diversity, and most of you guys remember the story of Darwin's finches, they were a flock of a pretty largeable size of a flock of finches that lived in South America. Here's the map, here's South America. The Galapagos Island is down here on the bottom of South America. All right, or the bottom of the side. All right, so what happened is this flock of finches during a hurricane must have been blown from the South American mainland out onto the Galapagos Islands. Now, the Galapagos Islands are a chain of islands. They were too small to fly back. They got out there and they got stuck. All right, but the Galapagos Island is a chain of islands, and each one has different seeds and different plants and different foods available. And so when this flock of finches, there was a big flock, they were it was all one species, but there was genetic variations within the species. When they got blown out onto the separate islands, the different foods available meant that some of the finches had a better chance at getting food than others. Think about within the human population, we have some that are built like football players and some that are built like baseball players, right? That's just how we're built. All right. And we're still the same species. I mean, I've never played football, but I'm built like a football player, right? Whereas my sister is built like a baseball player. Skinny little thing. All right. So you know what I'm saying. All right. So this giant big honker dude right here. All right. When they were sent to on his particular island, the only thing to eat was really hard seeds. And when they first got there, of course, you had some that were built like football players and some that were built like baseball players. Well, the ones that were built like baseball players didn't have the muscle strength to crack open the seeds. Only the ones that were built bigger got to eat. And then when it came time to mate, because all the others had died off, the only ones they had to mate with were the other big ones that were able to eat. And therefore, generation after generation, they're all getting bigger and bigger because that's the best ones who get to eat. And like on this one here, the skinny little ones, we have all different shapes of noses in the human population, right? Well, they had different slight variations in the shapes of their beaks within the finch population. These ones, some of them had longer noses, longer beaks, and they had a better chance on their island to get to the pollen and the nectar within the flowers. So the longer beak served them a better purpose. And so they were the ones who ate better. So when they came time to mate, the ones with the longer beaks were the ones who had survived. And they were the ones that they were able to mate with. And so that trait continued on and continued on. Well, that's genetic diversity. What you want is a population that has enough genes, enough gene variation within the population that if something happens to the habitat, some members of that species will survive. All right, and then pass those traits on to the offspring. These little corgis, you got the mother and the father, and combining the combinations into the babies. And the same thing here with these pictures of the sharks is kind of like the idea of what happened with the finches, because there was a large genetic population. Large genetic diversity within the population. When they landed on the individual islands, there was some of each that were able to survive. If they'd had low genetic diversity, it's quite likely that it'd been a gamble to see if any of the finches would have had the right traits. All right, so the greater the chance that individuals possess favorable traits needed to survive when you have a large one. All right, so I'm going to watch this film clip. First, we're going to make sure I've got sound. This is a short film clip that goes into genetic diversity, but it also brings up, first off, give me so somebody waving the camera. Can you hear it? Yes?
We've seen
okay,
that genes
so
can
let me pause it
vary.
back. All right, so I wanted to make sure that I was sending sound across. All right, so with this video, he's covering specifics of the genetic diversity. He's also covering why, with the food that we eat, it's important to have it. You'll see when he talks about the food near the end, but he also talks about, I'll bring up an example of the food for myself that has happened in my lifetime, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. It's a longish kind of video. Try to stay focused with it because he brings in the concepts that we'll need to pull up tomorrow. Okay, tomorrow, functional diversity, because we're going to have our three today. We've had species, we're in genetic right now, and then we're going to cover ecosystem. Tomorrow is functional, and it's a little bit weird. He's covering some of the stuff you need, so try to pay attention as you're listening.
We've seen that genes can vary. Most clearly, they differ among the major groups of organisms. That's evident because genes lead to body forms, or phenotypes, and phenotypes of these different organisms can vary, everything from a tree to a sand dollar and beyond. The genes can also vary among closely related species. Even if you look at the hundreds of species of beetles in a single beetle genus, each of those species has its own genetic makeup. But here, we want to talk about how genetic diversity also occurs among distinct populations of a single species, or among the individuals within a species. Think of the hundreds of different breeds of dogs, or the numerous varieties of roses. Those all represent genetic diversity within the single species of dogs and the single species of roses. Dogs and roses Sounds like a rock group. Each individual is a little bit like a ship loaded with crew members. Some crew members are at the helm, some care for the engines, and some are swabbing the decks. But no two ships have exactly the same crew. Even though the ships might look identical from a distance, each crew adds subtle differences in the directions that their ship might take, how well the engines are running, or even how clean the decks are. Put all those ships into a big fleet, and you have a lot of different crew members. You have a labor pool. Just like those ships, each organism is unique internally, but each organism is unique in its genetic information. If we consider all the individuals in the population, we have a lot of different genes. Collectively, these are known as the gene pool, the complete set of genetic information within a population of a given species or within the species itself. The larger the gene pool, the greater the genetic diversity. The higher the chances are that some members of the population will survive or even flourish in times of environmental change and challenges. That's because some of the individuals are going to have traits that make them resilient in the face of changes in the environment, more resistant to disease, and more able to survive changes in climate, and so on. We've already seen that this is due to the way natural selection works, selecting for fitter individuals that pass on their beneficial characteristics. But now we're going to tie that concept to the size of the population. Basically, the bigger the population, the more likely there will be individuals with some unique combination of genes that will allow their survival. But what happens when the gene pool is much smaller? In other words, when the gene pool is shallow. In the wild, in a small, isolated population of organisms, the choice of mates with whom to breed tends to be restricted to closely related members of the same population, possibly siblings or even cousins. So the genetic makeup of the individuals becomes more and more uniform. And what's worse, flaws or disabilities that those individuals might be carrying in their genetic information become expressed or appear in the population more frequently. And this is known as inbreeding. Evidence shows that maintaining not only large numbers of species in ecosystems, but large numbers of individuals within populations of those species is important to preserving biodiversity overall. Lots of different studies have shown that extinction, permanent loss of a species, is preceded by a drop in genetic diversity, a decrease in the gene pool within the threatened species. From the species point of view, decreasing genetic diversity is a sign of trouble ahead. Degradation of habitats can cause a decrease in population size and promote inbreeding. When the population size of a species is reduced to the point that it almost goes extinct, the species is said to have gone through a genetic bottleneck. American bison are a classic example of such a bottleneck. The drop in the bison population reduced their genetic diversity, which makes them more vulnerable to environmental changes and diseases. Just as we cannot get back a species that's been lost to extinction, it's very difficult and in most cases impossible to get back the genes that are lost when that species goes extinct or when individuals carrying unique genetic combinations die. As humans encroach on wild habitats, populations consequently become smaller, and so does the gene pool. This represents a loss of options for a population to respond to stresses, whether those are natural stresses or stresses caused by humans. Ecosystem services arguments go straight to this idea of conserving genetic diversity.
This is the part we're going to try to cover
Genes
tomorrow.
control the production of substances that we use in medicine and food and even as energy sources. Preserving genetic diversity increases the likelihood that new substances can be found among wild populations and that the supplies of useful substances we already have can be maintained. The erosion of genetic diversity in agriculturally important species can come in two forms. One is due to artificial selection for special traits that humans find desirable to the exclusion of other traits. The other source of erosion is that we focused our dependence on only a few organisms.
Try to
For
focus on this
example,
part,
only
guys.
about 100 or so species of plants account for 90% of our food crops. And only 3 different species, corn, rice, and wheat, account for something close to 70% of the calories consumed by humankind. And these include 50% of the plant proteins we eat. What if some disease attacks any of these basic sources of our own nutrition and those plants have no genetic resistance? I hate to think about the dire effects the lack of genetic diversity would have on our own survival.
See, so that's why genetic diversity is going to be such a huge deal. Um, we'll cover a food chapter when we talk, they call those monocultures, when you plant just one type of something. And it's a big, big problem with maintaining genetic diversity. So that's the second type. So, and again, he hinted at some of the functional diversity that we'll hit tomorrow. All right, the third one, the last one that we're going to cover today is ecosystem diversity, and that's pretty easy. These are the biomes and the ecospheres. All right, all the different types of ecosystems that we have available, like grasslands and forests and rivers and lakes. And when we pull them on up, then we begin to talk about the different biomes. Okay, like savannas and taiga and tundra and deserts and rainforests, all of those different things. These are the ecosystem, um, the different, that's ecosystem diversity. Okay, what this picture right here is, this picture is a slice of the United States. All right, this half is the Pacific Ocean, and this half is the Atlantic Ocean. So we've just cut a section of the U.S. straight across the middle. And this is before we started, paving over everything, building skyscrapers and mini malls. This is back with it when it was still clean. All right, but within this one stretch of the U.S., we had all of these different ecosystems, and plus we had some minor ones in between there. Okay, so all of these different types of ecosystem. What that means is then that there's a better chance of whatever animal you're talking about being able to find a good place to live, being something that a habitat that would be perfect for that organism. And this is just this one section of the U.S. It's not even considering what we have further down here, like Texas and Florida and all that stuff, or going up top and bottom if you add in the Canada and add in South America and the Middle America, like Mexico and Middle America, and then down into South America. If you start stretching that, there's tons and tons and tons of different ecosystems. Well, that's ecosystem diversity. And so that means that the more different ecosystems you have to choose from, the more likely you'll have some place that the organism can be comfortable and can live in. All right, so let's open up today's worksheet because that's the end. So let me see. First off, give me a thumbs up in the chat line. Let's go to the chat line, everybody. And I'm going to be looking for chats. Give me a thumbs up. Do you understand what we have going on so far? Do you understand the 3 types of diversity we covered? Species diversity with um, variety and abundance. Then we talked about genetic diversity, where the larger the gene pool is, the more likely you'll have, if something bad happens to the habitat, some survivors. And then ecosystem diversity, so that every one of the animals can find a good place to live. All right. So give me a thumbs up. Are you with me so far and ready to go? Because I'm about to talk about today's worksheet, which is primarily about genetic diversity. So give me your thumbs up if you're with me so far, and then let's look at today's worksheet. Keep the thumbs coming because I'm going to be checking on them. All right, if you don't understand, give me a thumbs down and we'll work on some stuff. But if you understand the 3 types of diversity that I've covered, species diversity, genetic diversity, and ecosystem diversity. All right, give me some thumbs up and let's look at today's worksheet. Keep those thumbs coming because I'm going to be looking to see who's paying attention. All right, because there'll be part of a grade here to giving me your thumbs. All right, so the worksheet today is talking about genetic diversity. And this picture on top is a Cuban land snail. Of course, it's on the land. So for what I want you to think about with all of these colors is camouflage. All right, there are some soils that are full of clay that are really reddish, and other soils that are full of silt that are grayish. So because think about it, just in the United States, Georgia, if you've ever been to Georgia, those soils there are really red and rusty colored. The soils here are more gray. Think about when the mud dries. Okay, it's a really more gray soil. So these Cuban land snails, they got it all covered. All right, because some of them are reddish and some of them are grayish, then regardless of where they wind themselves up, because this is Cuba, but if it's American situation, kind of the same thing. wherever they wind up, there's likely to be somebody who is camouflaged to match the correct soil where they are. Now, this other part of the worksheet today is the Irish potato famine. All right, now, for us, potatoes right now, they are so full of carbs and starches that we try to avoid them because we are very sedentary. We don't really need that much calories and that much energy. We don't need it. That's why we try to avoid having that many carbs. But back then, they needed it. They were working hard with their farms. They were working hard with their building their houses, running their children. They were very, very active. All right, and they needed to have the potatoes. They needed the calories from the potatoes, and that was the main staple of their diet. But the way that potatoes grow is you cut them up into pieces, and then you plant the different pieces, and then it grows a new plant, which means basically that each one of the pieces is a clone of the original plant. And almost everybody in Ireland was using a potato that they called the lumper. I don't know what the actual species name is, but they all called it the lumper. The lumper potato got a disease, and every one of the lumpers potatoes died, and they all started to starve to death. Because in Ireland, you're not going to get rice. Wheat is in that rocky soil. You're not going to get much wheat, and you're not going to get corn. Potato was their main meal, and they all started to starve to death. At that time, 1846 to 1852, we had a huge influx in the U.S. of Irish immigrants who were running from the potato famine. They were starving, and they came to America just because they didn't have any place else to go, and that was only the richest of them. The rest of them just sat there and starved. And so, but it was because that they were all using the same potato, and it got a fungus or a disease or something, and they all died. The same thing happened in my lifetime with bananas. Okay, you guys ever had a banana Laffy Taffy? Okay, bananas used to taste that good. Bananas used to taste that good, that sharp, that banana-y when I was a kid. There was a species of banana that started with an H. I want to say Haversham, but I don't know for sure. It starts with an H. All right, that species of banana died out, and bananas now taste like paper. I mean, if you guys didn't know any difference, you've never tasted the other type of banana. But to me, the difference is striking. They actually tasted like banana Laffy Taffies, whereas now the bananas just taste like paper. It just doesn't have much of a taste at all. And it's because we were using those H species bananas. They got some fungus or a disease or something. They all died out. And so now we're using this other one. So genetic diversity has a key in that. When in a species, at least we had a banana to fall back on. We didn't lose bananas entirely. They just don't taste as good. All right, so genetic diversity has a big issue with that. Okay, does anybody have any questions for me? I've gotten your thumbs up. I'm going to count those in just a second. I want you guys to take a few minutes. I'm going to flip the video recording off if we are all done with our questions, and I'll give you guys a chance to do your worksheet. We all good? Okay, you don't turn your cameras off. I'm just going to stop recording. Okay, so stop recording.